Hi folks. So today I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be rebuilding the finger loops on my basket maker style Atlatl here. They finally worn out after almost 10 years. So I'm going to be referencing a really good book here called Practical Atlatlery of the Four Corners by Justin Garnett. It's a great reference book for basket maker Atlatls. There's been a lot of good really good high quality artifacts found, so we know a lot about how this particular style was put together. It's a little bit of a lighter weight, kind of a smaller size, but it's really good for me for fishing and for small game, of course anything up to deer or antelope. Uses slightly smaller darts typically. The ones I've got back here are about 6 foot long. Now I'm not going to be doing a complete build because the Atlatl itself is already built. This particular one is going to end up being kind of a hybrid of the Sand Dune Cave and the White Dog Cave styles. And that brings me to an important point that I want to address real quick. What I'm doing when I make something like this, it's not a perfect replica, is experiential archaeology. Which is to say, I'm not trying to specifically replicate a certain artifact to find out certain things about how it worked by running it through the scientific process, right? Question, hypothesis, experiment, results, conclusion. What I'm doing is making something that works well for me and will hopefully work well for you. That isn't necessarily perfect to a specific artifact. In this case, that's going to be sort of a hybrid model. And I'm doing that by simplifying the style of finger loops that go on this from the original version to a different form. Practically speaking, there won't be any difference. It's just going to be a little easier to put together for any of you at home that want to try and make this particular style. I'll also be showing you some of the Stone Age tools and the modern steel equivalents, just so you don't have to go through the process of making your own bone needles and stone cutting tools and all that stuff to go ahead and try and make one of these yourself. So let's get started. Now, if you want to do your build genuine to an original artifact, of course you're going to want to use Stone Age tools. Now for this build, we need a bone needle and some thread. This is sinew thread left over from a previous project, which you can look back down the list and see. Bone awl here, and a stone blade, a piece of chert that's been broken off a core. It's very sharp, makes an excellent X-Acto knife. On the modern side, we've got, of course, steel needle, steel awl, steel scissors, steel knife. Kind of a intermediate. We've got the leather pad, leather thimble, the pencil, twig with a burnt end, functions as a pencil. And since I'm going to be using this for fishing, I'll actually be using plant fiber, in this case some hemp thread, instead of gut or sinew or that sort of thing, because that tends to loosen up a little bit with repeated exposure to moisture, and in the canoe or the kayak it's going to get wet. The pattern for the finger loops here is actually very simple. It's just two pieces. This is about 1 inch wide by about 5.5 inches long. There'll be some excess that we trim off. It's been folded in half, and then I've sort of pre-marked the holes and got it ready to assemble. This is going to be a retention strap that gets tied on separately, and we'll go over that and how that works once we get there. So the pattern we're going to need for these finger loops is very simple. This particular piece is about 6 inches long by 4 inches wide. I like to cut these a little bit long so that I've got space to work with. You can see I've got a slit cut here on both sides, and I've got holes pre-punched with the awl on both sides. To get those, what I've done is folded it in half, because it's going to be doubled up like this, so only about a 1/2 inch thick, and then I laid the end of the Atlatl handle over it. I cut the slits just a little bit smaller. I want it to stay tight. I don't want it to be super loose, but that'll fit over the end of the handle here. That's going to slide up here. And once I've got that, I've kind of bent it around with my finger here and marked where the holes are going to be on the notches here. And we're actually going to sew the finger loops to the handle. Now this other strip here, and it's about pinky fingernail width, maybe 1/3 of an inch. This is going to be a retention strap. That's actually going to kind of sit like this with the loops and tie onto the handle separately. That's going to help keep everything in place. And we'll show you how that all assembles when we get there. But first, we got to get the finger loops on. Alright, first thing here, we're going to go ahead and widen up our pre-punched holes just a little bit. We've got a lot of, now, a reasonable amount of material we're going to want to pull through those. So we want them to be nice and wide. We're going to fold this in half, and we want the fold to be on the bottom. So by bottom, the spur of our Atlatl is on the top. Our banner stone, our counterweight here, is on the bottom. And so we're going to slip both of those cuts over the handle. And like I said, I want this to be kind of a tight fit. So we're going to bring that up. Now it's a little high up here, and that's done on purpose. That's where our fingers are going to sit. And you can see the pre-punched holes line up pretty nicely with the grooves there. I like these to be just a little bit loose at this stage because I'm going to pull these tight when I put the retention strap on. Like I said, we're going to be using a plant fiber cordage here, and just so that you can see how this is done at home, we're going to go ahead and use a steel darning needle and believe it or not, a pair of pliers by the time we're done here. Now to start, if we're using something like gut, like hog gut, or a squirrel gut or deer gut, something like that, or sinew, don't have to necessarily tie this. We can kind of stick it to itself. Here, what we're going to want to do is what I believe is an arbor knot. We're going to wrap this end around the string here several times, and it gives us a sort of a self-tightening slip knot. And take our string, our thread, and give it a couple of wraps around to really help hold that on tight. Now, of course, the easy part, thread the needle, and we're going to take this, fold it in half, take this, fold it in half, run the needle through the top, front and back, and pull that through, and then make sure we're lined up. Put the needle through bottom, front and back. Find the hole, there we go. Pull that through and under. And we got a good bit of slack here because it's going to be something we want tied in place pretty tight. So we're going to be doing several times around for both sides here. I like to go ahead and do 2 times around for the first loop before we go back and do the second loop. There we go. That's on there pretty tight. And you want to give this a good pull. I'm going to actually take this and run it underneath the loops, kind of through the groove, but not through the leather here. I'm doing that for a specific reason. I want this to be very tight. So before I sew the other side on, I want it braced against the hard wood, not the soft leather on the other side. Now we came under the thrower that time, under the handle, so we're going and we're starting in the bottom and then coming through the top. There we go. This is a thicker piece of buckskin from the neck of a good-sized buck, so it's well softened, but it's thick, so it can be a little kind of tricky, a little difficult to get the point of the needle all the way through, even with the holes pre-punched with the awl. Gonna come back through this side like before. Make sure we don't run it through the leather, but around in between the leather and the wood, so that we're running it through the wood, and pull that very tight, and then repeat. And once we've got these two loops essentially sewn on independently, the next several stitches are actually going to go through both of them, so that they're not only secured directly to the atlatl, but they're also secured to each other. Like I said, this is once this is all together and finished, these loops are going to receive a significant amount of force during a throw. Another thing, we want to at this stage make sure everything fits and it looks pretty good. We're gonna hold it like that when it's done. There we go. We're also going to water form these, so they will change shape a little bit. At this stage, of course, it's just running the needle back through the hole. There we go. And it's getting very, very difficult to push through now, because the more of that hemp we get into the pre-punched hole, the tighter it gets and the more difficult it gets to pull the needle through. And that's only going to get more so here while we keep running this loop around, and make sure that this is a very secure, tight fit. And try not to sew the camera tripod to the atlatl, because the camera tripod will slow your throw a little bit. Alright, so we're going to keep at this, and we'll bring you back when this step is done so we can show you what the next step is. Okay, I've now sewn through the loops several times on both sides, and they're on there pretty tight. So what I want to do, just really make sure this is on here tight, is take the extra string here and run it around where the loops are sewn in. So I want it to go through that groove and actually kind of wrap those stitches on. Now, because it's next to impossible to pull this tight enough when you're looping it around, just because of the flat shape and the softness of the leather. Doing a couple, 3 or 4 wraps on each side kind of works like when you're doing a button. It gives an extra bit of tightness to that stitching and kind of forces that bundle of threads to be real tight, and then also will give us a convenient place to tie the finishing knot when we're done, and just helps really secure these loops in place. So we don't want these to wiggle around too much. We want this to be very tight, very solid, because that's really the main stress point when we're on the Atlatl, when we're throwing the spear, is going to be at the handle and at the spur. The spur on this one is carved into the piece of wood in such a way that it's not going anywhere. So we want to be real sure that this is on here tight. Now, when I've got this tied a couple times around and bundled up real good like that, I want to take the excess here and kind of loop back and forth so we get a little bit of an X pattern, an X shape on the top of it. That'll help secure all of that slack and just further anchor everything into place. And now once you're sure that you've got your binding on here good enough, we just want to run through, kind of loop it around like we have been. We're going to take and just do a simple half hitch knot, just like an overhand knot. I like to do a couple, 2, 3 of these just to really make sure that it's good and secure, and they'll be kind of pinched in under here, so that's not going anywhere. Now we're going to get our retention strap on here. Real quick, you can see how we've got that nice sort of X pattern on there, so it's real secure. That's going to hold good and tight. Alright, now that we've got the binding for the finger loops on here and in place, we're going to want to add our retention strap. This is just that sort of 1/4, 1/3 of an inch wide piece of leather. You can see this is kind of thicker stuff. Just again, want this to be real tough. To get this on here, I'm going to take and place the awl under the finger loop so that we can get it under there without it getting hung up too badly. There we go. Now once we've got that through, I'm going to fold it in half. I want it to sit in the right place. We want our fingers to sit comfortably in here, but we want it to be supported. So right about there is where we're going to want that to sit. Now this is going to be bound on here. Again, for this one with plant fiber. I'm going to do this the same knot I used previously, called a timber hitch. And I'm going to take the end, loop it around like that, and then wrap the tail a few times around itself like that, and pull it tight. And this creates sort of a self-tightening knot that will help everything hold in place really well, keep it nice and tight. And this little tail that's left over, instead of cutting that off, I'm actually gonna leave it under the binding just for sort of added security. There we go. Want that nice and tight. And you're actually looking at the bottom of the Atlatl here. We want this retention strap on the underside, where the fold is on the finger loops. And I'm going to pull that back here. I'm going to adjust this just a little bit. Don't want too much slack. And again, make sure, never be afraid to check your fit a couple of times. Make sure you're in the right spot. We're looking pretty good here, so we'll take our binding and pin that down. Now the slack on these we're just going to kind of push out of the way as we're wrapping here, and I'm going to keep that nice and tight, and just keep wrapping that around until we've got it nicely bound. Now the camera is in kind of a challenging position here so you can see what I'm doing. So we're going to skip ahead to where I'm going to tie the binding off, because this is literally just wrapping around the handle of the Atlatl and keeping everything tight. Now we've got this nicely bound, everything's pretty even. I think that looks good to me. I'm going to do 2 loops around here. I'm going to kind of pin this down with my finger on the top, and we want these loops to cross over each other, so we have sort of an X. There you go. I'm trying to make them loose enough that you can see what I'm doing here. We're going to take our tail and run it under that X through the middle. And I want to pull that tight so that everything is pinned down under itself like that. And now get that extra tight, and I'm going to take that same tail and run it back through one more time, kind of under the loop like that. Loop it back. There we go. Now, not quite. Had the wrong tail there at the other end of the binding there. Now, the loop coming out of the previous knot has gone around once, wrapped around and back under itself like this. Pull that nice and tight. Alright, so now that I've got that good and tight, I'm going to thread the needle here and make sure I don't lose the tail in the binding again. I'm going to pull that needle through, and that's just going to help make sure all the slack on here is good and tight. Nothing's going to kind of come undone without me wanting it to come undone. Now at this stage, we're going to trim off our excess material. Little string tails, and we're going to leave a little bit of the tail on the leather, not a lot, just in case we get some slippage. We don't want it to come undone. I always like to err on the side of caution when I'm doing something like this. It's going to be under a lot of stress. For the finger loops, of course, you can use the stone blade like I am here. You want to be careful, get a good grip, Try not to cut the handle or the binding. Much easier when you're not trying to do it on camera. There we go. And I'm cutting very slowly and very carefully with this. It's perfectly capable of cutting through this leather much quicker and much more efficiently. But I really want to make sure I don't bump any of the binding with it or cut anything that I've just spent the last half hour putting together. So we're cutting very slowly and carefully with it. There we go. Now, of course, you can do the same thing with a pair of scissors or your craft knife of choice. Now, you'll notice here the leather has a little bit of an uneven fold. There's a couple things that we could potentially do about that. The simplest is going to be to get this the leather here good and wet and water form it. All we got to do is soak it and then put a stick through each hole where my fingers are going to be that's about the right size to kind of let the leather dry stretched out, and then trim the excess off here. Otherwise, it's ready to use as is. I am going to go ahead and take a little bit of extra thread and bind this together down here, both to keep it as a single piece and just because I like the look of that sort of binding in that spot. Now the water forming is very simple. It's literally just soak the leather through and then let it dry around a form. The other thing, if you're fine with it looking a little rustic like this, it's actually ready to use as is. I think that's going to work out quite nicely. I'll look forward to putting this to use, going after some fish, and hopefully very soon throwing a little bit of a target to show you how well this compares to other style of atlatls and some other primitive hunting tools.